Hey, how are you doing today? Today is our first class online. It's kind of crazy. I wish I was there with you, and I wish we could be together, but this will have to do. So I hope this works out. I hope it works out for you. Please let me know how this works. If this is going to work out all right. I'm going to try to do these in short segments, so they're not going to be really long. There's nothing worse than watching a video. Especially watching somebody like me trying to teach you on a screen, which is not always going to be the funnest thing to do. So we're going to try to keep them short. I'm going to break these up. This first one will be cloud classification or forms of condensation, which we'll talk about clouds. The next one I will teach you will be about precipitation and different types of precipitation. Instead of putting them all together, if we were in class, I'd do it all at once. Or I'm just going to try to make them short and try to make them simple. And we'll go from there. All right, so let's take a look at cloud classification here. Cloud classification, we need to understand a little bit about the cloud classification because it's going to tell us a lot about the cloud itself. This cloud that you see behind me is a cloud that I really like. It's called a lenticular cloud. And a lenticular cloud, just like its name, lenticular or a lens, this looks like a great big lens that's sitting up and over top of a mountain. These are ones that we do get in here in Utah. We can see them every once in a while, and more than once in a while. We can probably see them almost every day if we sat there and stared at the mountains all day long. This one here in particular is probably in Washington, Oregon. It's above a volcano. And if you've lived in one of those states, then you definitely have probably seen one of these before. So let's take a look at clouds. We want to see what actually classifies a cloud. First of all, we need to know one quick little thing. A cloud is just water that's condensed, which means we've taken two water droplets, taken the energy out of them, we put them closer together, and as they come closer together, it's harder for light to pass through them, and the cloud becomes more visible. So let's look at cloud classification here. So how do we classify a cloud? Well, we classify it by two ways. One is that we have to look at its altitude, how tall it is, and the other one is its shape. So, what does it look like, and how high up in the sky is it? Let's take a look at this. So the cloud shape is going to be based off of a few little things. We have three words here that describe what the shape is. Cumulus is the shape that tells us it's going to be puffy and round, a lot like a cotton ball. So we have the word cumulus here. It's going to be puffy, and it's also going to be rounded like cotton balls or like cauliflower. This is the shape of the cloud. Cumulus, it looks puffy. Stratus. So we have the stratus here, and they are going to be flat and blanket-like. So if you've ever seen batting for a quilt, anybody that's familiar with quilting, you know you have some kind of batting here. Well, you can get into these great big rolls, and it is, maybe it's about that thick. And you lay it out, and you go ahead and make your quilt. That is what a stratus cloud kind of looks like. They take up the whole sky. They really don't have a shape to them, and it's just like a great big blanket, a cloud blanket that covers the whole area. So that is what a stratus cloud is. Stratus is flat like a blanket. Cumulus is puffy and rounded. And then we have the cirrus cloud. The cirrus cloud is a really high cloud. We're not talking about that kind of high. We're talking about the high cloud that's way up in the sky, 20,000 feet or higher. These are usually really thin and really wispy clouds. They end up being very icy. They have a lot of ice crystals in them. And so they're not really rain clouds. They're kind of see-through and very thin. Okay, it's almost like looking through like a satin sheet or a silk sheet. If it's kind of thin, you can kind of see through it. The light can still pass through it. That is what your cirrus clouds are. So these are the three shapes. Cumulus, puffy and round. Stratus, big, flat, cover everything. And then cirrus, they're going to be really wispy. Kind of like when you blow a candle out and the smoke that kind of leaves after that. It does, just kind of wispy. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So The first word that I gave you was about its shape. The second group here is going to tell you how high they are. So let's take a look at what high clouds, middle clouds, low level clouds, and clouds with vertical development are. So a high level cloud or a high cloud is any cloud that's above 20,000 feet. Any clouds above 20,000 feet is mostly probably going to be made up of ice, little crystals of ice. And that's really about it. They're probably not going to rain, probably not going to precipitate at all, but we'll probably just have some icy crystals in there. The next one is the middle clouds, and these are between 6,000 and 20,000 feet. Because they're between the 6 and 20,000 feet, they're going to probably have a little bit of thickness to them. And then we also have the low clouds, which are below 6,000 feet. These are going to be more of your winter type clouds. They're not really high cloud, they're a little bit lower. They can still storm, but probably not a lot. And then of course we have what we call clouds with vertical development. Now, clouds with vertical development are clouds that are definitely going to be massive thunderstorms. They're going to go all the way from 6,000 feet all the way up to 20,000 feet, and they can actually develop a lot of strength and energy from them. By the way, this picture, if you haven't noticed yet, you can see my horn right here is being blown out, and that cloud, this is one of those pictures that were just taken at the right moment. Love it. All right, so what do we call a high cloud, a middle cloud, and a low cloud? Let's take a look. A high cloud is called a cirrus cloud. Wait a second, didn't we just say it was a shape? Yes, it is a shape. Remember, it is a very wispy shape, but it's also the height of the cloud. So if I have a cirrus cloud, it's a really high cloud, and it has a very wispy shape to it. So these pictures that you see here, this picture here is of a cirrus cloud, is a high cloud. Remember, it's about 20,000 feet. And since it is so high, it's mostly made up of ice crystals, and it's very thin and wispy. In fact, these here are known as horses' tails. It kind of looks like a horse's tail. When a horse is running, it lifts up its tail and is running, and you see all the hair come from its tail off. That's what these are known as horses' tails. Oftentimes, horses' tails are an indicator of an upcoming storm. More than likely, it's going to be a warm front in about 3 or 4 days. So if we see these things, it kind of gives us an idea of what's coming out at us. Not always, but it can. So we have the high cloud is the cirrus cloud. The middle cloud is called alto. Alto is a middle cloud. So since we have an alto cloud and it's between 6 and 20,000 feet, the upper end of that cloud can form ice. The bottom half of that cloud will more than likely have liquid in there. And so when we can get that fluid or that liquid to move around within that cloud, we tend to get a mixture of both droplets of water and ice crystals. So we get both of them in there. So this is a cloud. If it does rain, it might actually rain cold raindrops on you. And you might even get a little bit of mixture of snow or other things in there as well, if the clouds are just right. So remember, high cloud is the cirrus, middle cloud is alto, and what's the low cloud? Stratus. So the low cloud is going to be a stratus cloud. Remember, stratus, it's the low one. It's also a shape as well, and it's a shape that does not actually have a shape to it. As you can see, this picture here, there's no real shape to it. It just looks like a bunch of fog. But this is a low-lying cloud, or a low cloud is a stratus cloud. Now, since it's low, it's mostly going to be made up of water droplets. Probably not going to be ice in there. Unless the temperatures are cold, then you could have ice that could form. You might have frost, or you might have freezing fog. But in most cases, you're probably just going to get water that's going to come out of here, because it's so low to the ground and it's not so cold. All right, so the next cloud here we have is called clouds with vertical development. Love this picture. This picture is awesome. So you can see way down here, this is where the LCL is, so the lifting condensation level. So if you remember, down here we have what's called the wet or the dry adiabatic rate. That dry adiabatic rate comes up, and I believe it's 10 degrees for every kilometer it drops. It drops 10 degrees for every kilometer it goes up. and then it hits that lifting condensation, and then it turns from dry adiabatic to wet adiabatic. And the wet adiabatic goes up from there, and if you remember, wet adiabatic is 5 to 9 degrees for every kilometer that you go up. And I hope you remember why it's lower. Why does it change from 10 and also it drops down to 5 to 9? That has to do that when, if you remember, when a cloud has condensation or it's starting to condense, condensation, what does it do to the environment? It heats up the environment. It has to release energy. If we want these two particles to come closer together, we have to get the energy out of it. So we steal the energy, that heat energy out of it, that latent heat, and we bring them in together, and that heat goes out into the atmosphere. When that heat is released, it's going to offset that 10 degree per kilometer of the dry adiabatic rate. So if it's producing 1 degree of heat, well, it's going to drop down from 10, it's going to put it down to 9 degrees. If it's producing 2 degrees of heat, it's going to put it down to 8, and we can get down to 5. So we say the wet adiabatic rate is from 5 to 9. The lower the number, the more energy that cloud is putting out. The higher that number, the less energy. And if it's at 10, it's not putting out any energy at all because condensation hasn't happened. But once it drops below 10 degrees per kilometer, then that cloud begins to form and it starts releasing energy, and it's going to offset that 10 degrees. It's going to drop that temperature down. So it's going to be hard. It's not going to cool down as fast. So what we end up is that energy is being released, and as the energy is released, all of that energy starts moving on up, and it starts drawing more energy from below, and we end up with a low pressure system here that starts drawing material upwards and all that moisture, and we get energy that comes up and starts dropping back down, and we get this great big cloud with vertical development on there. This is one of those ones that as we release that energy, it's going to keep on growing and growing and growing. And one of the things I love about this cloud is that when you look right up here, you can see that line that's right up there? That is where the tropopause is. So all this energy is going on up, and then boom, it hits that nice little flat layer right in through here, and it can't go up any higher. So instead, it starts spreading outward. It starts going out, and you can see how it's moving outward like this, and we have that nice lid on the top. So then why in the world do we have this here? That's because there's enough updrafts in this cloud that it can actually poke on up and right up and through that tropopause and go right up in the stratosphere, and then it comes right back down. That little hat at the top of that is actually in the stratosphere. Love this kind of cloud. It shows us a lot what's going on in the atmosphere. We can actually see where that layer between the troposphere and the stratosphere is by looking at this type of cloud. So this is a cloud with vertical development. Remember, we have 3 different shapes. We have cirrus, we have cumulus, and we have stratus. And then we have 4 different heights. Really just 3 different heights. We have either high, which is cirrus, we have middle, which is alto, and we have low, which is stratus. Low is below 6,000, alto is between 6,000 and 20,000 feet, and then cirrus is 20,000 feet or greater. And then when we have this here, this vertical development, that's a cloud that's going to go from 6 to 20,000 plus. Okay, so I don't know. We put it in here just so that you know that there is a little bit of a difference here, but it's not going to be part of a cloud. We're not going to go out and say, oh, look, that's a cloud of vertical development. We're actually going to give it a different name than this. So let's take a look at these names, and let's look at the different types of clouds. So here we have all these different types of clouds. If you notice, all these clouds up at the top here, those are known as cirrus clouds. So the one right in the middle right here is a cirrus cloud. Remember, cirrus means that it's high, and you notice that it doesn't have another name to it. Well, because that is the shape of cirrus, and it's already high, so we don't want to call it cirrus. We just want to call it cirrus. We don't need to give it another name. But when we look at this cloud over here, we see that we have a cirrocumulus cloud. Well, the cirro tells us that it's really high. It's above 20,000 feet. Cumulus says that it has the shape of little cotton balls. So this one is fitting for that name. Two different words. Cirro meaning high, cumulus meaning puffy. This one is both the shape and the height, so we just combine it into one word. This one right here is called our cirrostratus. Cirro means that it's above 20,000 feet, but stratus means that it's going to take up the whole sky. And this is a good Halloween cloud for me. I think it's a good Halloween. The sun's still going to shine through it, but it's going to be a little hazy. So it's going to be a bright cloud, and but it's not going to be a dark cloud because the light can still pass through it. Now let's take a look at this next one here. So right here we have an alto. Remember, alto is middle, so this is between 6,000 and 20,000 feet. This is an alto cumulus. So the word alto means that it is going to be a middle cloud, and the word cumulus is the shape. So cumulus means that it's nice and puffy, which we see these nice puffy clouds here. Middle puffy clouds, and they're usually a little bit thicker and heavier. You notice that the ones right up here, those are the cirrocumulus. They're not as heavy. They're not as thick. They're a little bit more thinner. You get down here and you'll see that these here are definitely a little heavier because they can actually get a little bit more thickness to them. So these are going to be your alto cumulus. And then of course right over here we have the alto stratus. Stratus tells us that it kind of takes up the whole sky. Alto is a middle cloud. So what's the difference between this one and this one? Well, the difference is if you look at this cloud, look how bright it is. That usually indicates that the cloud's not very thick, it's thin. And if it's bright, it's probably a lot higher in the sky. This one over here, it's a lot thicker. And because it's a lot thicker, not as much light's going to pass through it, so it's going to be just a little on the darker side. So when you take a look at this, you'll see that the cloud here is just slightly a little bit more gray than this one. This one is a little bit more brighter. And of course, this is a picture, an artist rendering of these things. And we'll show you some actual pictures of this as we move on along through here. Okay, so now let's go down. We have that middle clouds. Remember, stratus means low level clouds. It's also a shape. Okay, it's also a shape. So if we see it here, we see that we have we have stratus. We don't have any word to this. So that means two things. It's a low level cloud and it has a big flat shape to it. We don't need to put stratus like cirrus. All we have to do is say it's a stratus cloud, which means that it's low and it takes up the whole entire sky. Now, if we look at this one right here, we have what we call the stratocumulus. Strato tells us that it's a low level cloud, and that cumulus, it's a puffy cloud. Okay, but since it's a low cloud and it's kind of puffy, it's not going to have a lot of shape to it. So this is like a cotton ball that you've kind of stretched out a little bit. It doesn't have that definite shape, but you can still tell it's a cotton ball. That's going to be our stratocumulus. So we're going to have these lower level, kind of a puffier looking cloud that we'll see at a lower level. Remember, it's below 6,000 feet. They may be a little bit thicker, maybe a little bit heavier, and we're going to see a lot of them. If it's a stratocumulus, we're going to see lots of them. They're going to take up a whole sky. Now, way right here, we have just a cumulus cloud. These are clouds that are individual and they're on their own. So we don't really need to put down that it is we're not going to say that's a stratocumulus. We're just going to say it's a cumulus cloud. They're on their own. It's just the shape. These are the ones that we like to make shapes out of and say, oh, there's a little puppy dog, there's a bear, or whatever the case is. These are usually individual clouds. They're not really part of a bigger pack, and you just kind of see they're on their own. Now the two that are right behind me, especially this one right here, this is more of your winter type storm. So you notice that it's called the nimbostratus. We've seen some of these this year when we met in class. We came in, it was kind of rainy, the whole sky was full of clouds, a little bit on the darker side. That would be your nimbostratus cloud. Nimbostratus cloud, they do rain, not really heavy, but they do stick around and they cover up the whole sky. Why I say these are probably more of our winter clouds, because these clouds, they don't have a lot of development on here, and so they're not going to develop hailstones or other things. And guess what? We don't get hail in the wintertime, simply because the clouds cannot form high enough to be able to get that hailstone to go up and back down and up and down and get some development on there. So these are going to be mostly what we see in the wintertime. We won't see, I don't know if we'll ever see hail in the wintertime, unless we have a really warm winter. Then we might be able to see some of this stuff. So remember, if we want to see hailstones, we've got to have warm air. If we have cold air, you're not going to see those hailstones, because the cloud just doesn't develop enough height to be able to develop those stones. So this is more of our winter type clouds. Now this right here, this cumulonimbus cloud, this is the monster. This is the one that has the thunderstorms. This is the one that has the hailstones. This is the one that has tons of rain and lots of wind and all kinds of different things. The word nimbus in here, right here, or right over here, that just means that it is a rain cloud. It does produce rain. So anytime you see that word nimbo or nimbus in that cloud, it means rain. It is a rain cloud for sure. And this one is a cumulonimbus, which makes sense because it looks like a bunch of these cumulus clouds, but stacked on top of each other. And if you remember, this is what we would call a cloud with vertical development, because it goes all the way from down here to about the 6,000 level, all the way up to the upper portions of 20,000 or higher. So these are the cloud types. Now let's take a look at actual clouds and see if you can actually see what they are. So a cirrus cloud. Remember, a cirrus cloud is a high cloud. And since we don't have another word to this, this cloud should actually have really wispy looks to it, kind of like horses' tails. And they're going to be thin. They're going to be full of ice crystals. Ta-da! There you go. So thin, wispy, really high clouds, sky still blue, and we've got this nice ice crystal formation going on. These are cirrus clouds. We don't need to put any other word with it except for just cirrus, and that works just fine. Let's go on to the next one. Our cirrocumulus. Can you identify what a cirrocumulus is? Cirro tells us how high up it is. So cirro is a high cloud. Cumulus tells us the shape, so it's going to be puffy. So we have these really high puffy clouds. Okay, we know that they're high clouds simply because they're pretty thin. They don't take up the whole sky. You can still see blue sky through there. Some of these clouds are right down through here. You'll see that we can still get some sun through them. They're really good at refracting light, which probably indicates that they're full of ice crystals. Act like little prisms. In fact, if we get a nice cirrostratus cloud, then we can actually get some rings around that. And hopefully I've got a picture of it here for you. But this is our cirrocumulus cloud. Let's take a look at the next one here. Cirrostratus. Hey, take a look at that. Okay, these are going to be high clouds. They're going to take up the whole entire sky. We can tell the difference between a cirrostratus and an altostratus by how dark it is. If they're fairly bright clouds, then we'll probably have a cirrostratus. So let's see if this is it. Yep. Okay, so if you notice, these clouds through here, they are pretty bright. Okay, we've got a little bit of blue sky up and through here, but we have some bright clouds, which means that they're not really thick or they're not really compacted together. So we end up with light passing through them, and they end up being pretty bright and brilliant. This is a cirrostratus cloud. Let's see what our next one is. Altocumulus. So our alto cloud means that we have a middle cloud between 6,000 and 20,000 feet. And cumulus, if you remember what the word cumulus is, that's the shape. So we have a middle cloud between 6,000 and 20,000 feet, and it has a puffy appearance to it. So let's take a look at this. Hey, look. Okay, so one thing that you notice here, we did show you one here before. It was a cirrocumulus, but you'll notice that the cirrocumulus were a little bit brighter. They were a little bit more white, because we could get more light through it. However, look how dark these are. they're a little bit on the darker side. It doesn't mean that it's rain clouds. It just means that light has a harder time passing through it. And so we're actually starting to see shadow underneath that cloud. So when we see that shadow underneath that cloud, that's going to tell us that we have a little bit of a thicker cloud, which definitely fits the description of an alto cloud, between 6 and 20,000 feet. And since we have that puffiness here, we can call it an alto cumulus cloud. And that's exactly what we have here is an alto cumulus cloud. So alto stratus. Alto means middle, 6 to 20,000 feet. And stratus, that is a cloud that's going to take up the whole sky. This is the shape. So let's take a look at this. Look at that. That's way different than the cirrocumulus. Remember I told you on the not the cirrocumulus, the cirrostratus. The cirrostratus is a little bit brighter cloud. Still see-through. You can see some blue sky on this. This one here is definitely a an alto stratus. Takes up the whole sky, and you can see that we've got some nice dark shadow underneath here, which tells us that we are definitely got some thickness to this. But it's not so thick because we can still see the sun. And a lot of the times the sun is bright enough here that you can get this. See, this is my Halloween sky. We get that nice little glow. Sometimes you can get a moon to do that as well. If the cloud has a lot of ice in it and a lot of crystals, and remember this can have ice because between 6 and 20,000 feet, the upper end can have ice in it, the bottom end can have more liquid in there. We can get these rings that form around this, which we would call halos or sundogs. That's just that little rainbow that's around there. And we can also get them with cirrus clouds as well, as cirrostratus cloud. Okay, let's take a look at the next one here. We have a nimbostratus. Nimbo, what does that mean? That means that we've got some kind of storm. We've got rain for sure. This is a rain a rain cloud. And stratus means it's going to take up the whole entire sky. So we've got a stratus cloud that takes up the whole sky. It's raining. This is going to be a low level cloud that takes up the whole sky. Rain, definitely a winter cloud. A winter cloud for us. Okay, does that look familiar to you? Definitely it does to me. We see these all the time. So we can see that we've got some dark patchiness in here, which means that we have some part of the cloud that is actually thicker than other parts. This is a little bit thinner, so we're getting some light through there. We're getting some darker spots through here, which means that we're getting less light pass through there and the shadows are darker. This right up here is definitely a lot darker. So we've got even a thicker cloud up in there, which can more than likely have a little bit more rain to it. So we see these cover up the whole sky. We end up with this nice little rain cloud here. Stratus. Okay, we don't call it stratus. We don't see two words here. We only see the one. So we know that this is a low-level cloud that takes up the whole entire sky. So it's going to be similar to this one, but it's not a rain cloud. So this is just a cloud that takes up the whole sky. And it might look like a rain cloud, but my guess is this was taken towards the evening. So there's probably not a lot of light here. If it was during the day, you might actually see that this might be just a bit lighter. Now, one of the things I love about this cloud, if you notice down on the bottom, we get these nice little wavy patterns that are happening through here. I love looking at the clouds because the clouds tell us a lot about what the atmosphere is doing. So why in the world are we getting these wavy patterns here? Well, what you're actually looking at is what the wind is doing in the atmosphere. That wind is coming up and back down and up and back down and up and back down, and it's forming these clouds. Picture this. If you could have a puddle of water or even a fish aquarium and you had water in there, okay, and if we could fill the top of that container with dry ice, or just the cloud from the dry ice, and we had water, and if I plopped a pebble in there, that water would ripple. And if you could look at the cloud of that dry ice that's sitting on top of it, it would ripple too. It would be an imprint of what the water is doing. And this is what this is doing, but instead of water, we have air. And so that air is actually causing that rippleness in that bottom of that cloud as well. Kind of cool stuff. I love looking at this to be able to see what's going on in the sky. Okay, stratocumulus. What do we have with the stratocumulus? Strato means what? It means that it is low, a low cloud. Cumulus means that it's puffy. So we have a nice probably a whole bunch of puffy clouds that are kind of all crammed together. Think of it as like a whole bunch of sheep, putting them all in one room, and you can see individual sheep, but they kind of look like they may all be together. I don't know if that makes any sense, but let's take a look. Okay, stratocumulus. So we can see we've got one cloud right here. We have another one right over here. We have all these different clouds that kind of packed together. We can see that they are because you can see that we've got the shadow right here. We know that that's just one cloud. This is another cloud. Look up at the sky, they're all kind of together. But the difference between the shape of a stratus is you wouldn't be able to identify these individual shapes. If it was a stratus, they would all be kind of blended together. But since we can't see individual shapes in here and we can see the individual clouds, we're going to call this a stratocumulus cloud. All right, cumulus. This is the one that everybody loves to lay down on the blanket and look at the sky and try to see what the shapes are. Here we go. Looking down, we have the nice blue sky. This doesn't look threatening at all. This looks like a nice summer afternoon. In fact, we get a lot of these in the late afternoon in the summertime because what happens there is that we have this ground that's down here that gets heated up by that sun all day long, especially if you have a lake like Utah Lake. We get that lake and it warms up during the day, and by 4 or 5 o'clock, all of that water starts to evaporate and goes up. And if you look above the lake, you'll see a lot of these type of clouds because that water goes on up, hits that lifting condensation level, and poof, it turns into a cloud. And you'll start seeing these little clouds. You'll see this in the summertime almost always late afternoon. You might even get these late afternoon showers in the summertime. And then as it starts to get towards the evening, they'll disappear. Why do they disappear? Well, because there's no more sun. So the ground is cooling off. And as it cools off, there's no more vertical lifting, or we have no updrafts of warm air bringing up moisture to get that cloud to form. And so usually towards the evening, the clouds disappear and everything becomes a little bit more stable because we don't have rising air and we actually have sinking air as things cool down. All right, cumulonimbus. We've got the word nimbus in there, so that means we've got rain. We definitely have rain. We have all kinds of storminess. Cumulo, that's going to be that puffy cloud. And if you remember, I had a picture right over here of this cloud that started down low, and then it had all this vertical development, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can see all the puffiness. That is a cumulonimbus cloud. So this thing could still move on up, and we can get higher and higher and higher, and we can get a nice rain cloud out of this. Okay, this is it. This is about all that I have. I'm not going to quiz you on this stuff, but definitely you want to know basically 2 things about clouds. One, what's its height? That's the first word. And then the second one is its shape. So if I have a cloud that has a really high, above 20,000 feet, I use the word cirrus. If it is a puffy cloud, then I would use cumulo. So I have a cirrocumulus cloud, and that would give me the puffiness. Work with it. Check it out. Try it out. See if you can do it when you go outside. Go outside for a walk and see if you can name what the clouds are. Okay, be on the lookout for another video here soon. We'll do precipitation. Hopefully I can be able to pull some things together there, and we'll try to get this stuff to you as fast as we possibly can. Thanks. I hope you had a good day, and I hope this wasn't too painful for you. It was actually pretty fun for me. I feel like I should be on the weather, on the news. Yeah, who knows. Take care. See ya.